have been arguing the biggest and the best and the most talented big men in NBA history. And a lot of people think I'm crazy to put Tim Duncan anywhere on that list. Now, I've argued this throughout social media for the past 2 years. Some people would take Kevin Garnett over Tim Duncan. Some people would take Karl Malone, or you would take Kareem Abdul-Jabbar, or Wilt Chamberlain, or one of these guys, Bill Russell. The eye test shows me and tells me. Now, Larry Bird was the closest thing to a power forward. I mean, if you look at Larry Bird, he at some points he was the 3 and he was the 4. So if you want to put Larry Bird in that discussion as a power forward, you can also put Magic Johnson in that discussion because he played power forward at certain aspects of his game in certain times of his game where he played and he was a dominant power forward.
That's impressive for a guy that was labeled as a point guard.
But Tim Duncan, to me, is the greatest big power forward in NBA history. Now, I know a lot of people are going to say, well, Tim Duncan was boring. Oh, all he did was bank. He was a defensive-minded player. He was this, he was that. Go look at what the San Antonio Spurs have done since he retired. Go look at what their record has been since the day he really hung up those cleats, those sneakers.
They had the 1 year in 2016-17 where they went to the Western Conference Finals, obviously before Kawhi Leonard got hurt. And that was really it in terms of their, I guess, big year. The rest of the time, they're kind of that middle-tier playoff team. They were a 5 seed some years. They were a 6 seed. The year they lost that classic Game 7 against the Clippers. And you're right. They really have kind of been, again, Popovich will keep them afloat, but they've really kind of been still kind of more of an average talent-wise team.
And people try to compare and contrast numbers because that's what they want to do. Well, Tim Duncan doesn't have better numbers than this guy. Or Karl Malone had better numbers than Tim Duncan. Karl Malone also played more games. He also played more years. Right. Okay? And Tim Duncan played a game, especially a game where there, to me, even though Karl Malone played in a time with Michael Jordan, he played in a time where Shaquille O'Neal was a young, dominant player, Charles Barkley, and I think the game was a little bit better in those times. Tim Duncan still came in those times. He was still around in 99. His rookie season, I think, was 98.
Yep.
So Tim Duncan, he won a championship in 99 against the New York Knicks. Yes, it was a short season, but he was by far one of the best big men in the NBA, his second year in the NBA.
And wasn't that after David Robinson left?
Yes. Yeah. No, David Robinson was a part of the team when they won in 99. Then he left.
All right. So he was probably at that point the second best player on the team already. I mean, he was number one.
He was one of the top 5, top 6 players in the NBA at the time. But you know, it throws me off because a lot of people look at Tim Duncan. He banks the ball. He's boring. There's nothing exciting about this guy. And then you try to compare, and he's going to the Hall of Fame. He is absolutely going to the Hall of Fame. I think he's
eligible this year.
Yeah, he's eligible. So he is going to the Hall of Fame this year. So he's a first ballot Hall of Famer. Here's the problem: why people completely forget how great Tim Duncan is, because when you look at Tim Duncan and you talk about some of the greatest teams in NBA history, people forget that or say that Gregg Popovich is the reason why this team was as dominant as they were in those times. In the 15, 16-year skid where they won 5 titles, everybody compares and contrasts Bill Belichick to Gregg Popovich. But you could say whatever you want. Without Tom Brady, Bill Belichick wouldn't be Bill Belichick. And the same thing with Tim Duncan. Without Tim Duncan, Gregg Popovich wouldn't be Gregg Popovich. Just like Phil Jackson wouldn't be Phil Jackson without Michael Jordan, Scottie Pippen, Kobe Bryant, and Shaquille O'Neal.
Right. And I have always said that, at least for the Patriots standpoint, it was 60-40 for Belichick. But again, what do you think the ratio would be for Popovich in terms of, did he have the most control? You think Duncan had more credit for that, I guess?
Credibility. If you look at Tim Duncan and what Tim Duncan's done for the team as a bench coach, they're a better team right now. Mm-hmm. Ever since he came to the bench and he took over on the bench as an assistant coach, you can see the difference of the team and the way they play. And Tim Duncan has a way, and he has like a swagger that it's not necessarily about the points or what you do on the court. It's what you do off the court. It's how you lead by example and being a captain. That's what Tim Duncan has changed in the game of basketball. When you talk about skills, yeah, well, Kevin Garnett was an unbelievable power forward. He was a great rebounder. He was a great defensive player. But you can honestly sit here and tell me that you would take Kevin Garnett over Tim Duncan, his all-around game? No. I wouldn't. Now, Karl Malone, great offensive player. Problem with Karl Malone, and everybody will tell you about Karl Malone if you know anything about Karl Malone, is Karl Malone wasn't one of those precise top defensive players at his position. So Karl Malone was an offensive player. He liked to talk to the ball when he shot his foul shots. And I mean, he was a different type of player. Now, does that mean that Karl Malone, you couldn't put him in the same vicinity of Tim Duncan? The problem is I don't think people give Tim Duncan enough credit. I really don't. You talk about Kevin Durant and how much everybody loves Kevin Durant and what Kevin Durant's done for the league. What has Kevin Durant done for the league? Honestly. You talk about a guy that's 6'11", his wingspan is about 7'3", and he's a great three-point shooter. He's a great all-around player. He's one of the top 3 players in the NBA. Did Kevin Durant win without Steph Curry, Klay Thompson, and Draymond Green? He didn't.
Nope.
Okay? When you talk about Tim Duncan and what Tim Duncan did, he went to a team, with David Robinson at the end of his career.
Right.
And when, after David Robinson, and he won with David Robinson in 99, he went along and won 4 other championships, 4 other titles with rookies. Manu Ginobili was a rookie when he came into the league. Mm-hmm.
Tony Parker.
Tony Parker was a rookie when he came into the league. You're talking about all these players, and including, to me, one of the best players in the NBA, Kawhi Leonard. Mm-hmm. Rookie. They built their team around one player. Now, Kevin Garnett, say whatever you want. Kevin Garnett was on the Minnesota Timberwolves. And he left the Minnesota Timberwolves because he couldn't stand the organization, he couldn't stand the ownership, and he went to the Boston Celtics. Why did he go to the Boston Celtics? Because he wanted to win with his best friend, Paul Pierce and Ray Allen. Mm-hmm. He went there.
And again, that team was very...
No, he got traded, but he went there.
Right. That team...
demanded a trade.
Right. That team was all Kevin Garnett at that time, so yeah, he got to also show his skills more, whereas the difference with Duncan, with Popovich's system, with a lot of different other things, he did what he did very well, but he also could do everything and be a lot of different things, whereas maybe Kevin Garnett was the talent player. Mm-hmm. Duncan could do everything and know when to do everything right at a high level. In terms of basketball IQ, you could argue he's one of the best we've ever seen.
And it's so funny because I've interviewed guys like Marley, Barkley over the years. I've met some of these NBA players that I've seen and had the opportunity, the experience to see Tim Duncan play, how nice of a player he is, how good of a leader he is on the basketball court. And he really takes the game to that next level, not only as a captain of the team, but a leadership. And he drives the players to play better, not only for him, but in front of him. So when you look at a leader, and that's what you have to look at when it comes to contrast and numbers, and you can compare and contrast numbers to Kevin Garnett and Wilt Chamberlain and Bill Russell. In my eyes, I'm not looking at the points or rebounds or assists. What I'm looking at is what he did as an all-around team player. 5-time All-Star, 5-time All-NBA player, 3-time Finals MVP, 5-time All-Defensive player. 1999 to 2000, he was an MVP. 2-time MVP. 5-time NBA champion. To have those numbers, to be and be in those perspectives of trying to compare and contrast. Tell me right now, does Wilt Chamberlain have those numbers as a big man? I mean, I'm not talking about offensive numbers. I'm talking about defensive player of the year, all those things, 5-time All-Star, what he did in the time and the preciseness of what he did as a champion. Right. Wilt Chamberlain only won 2 championships.
Even if he did, too, you're dealing with an era where there weren't as many teams, there weren't as many overall amazing players, whereas Duncan played, like you were saying before, in the 90s and into the 2000s that had a lot of really talented athletic players at that time. And in the time Chamberlain played, as many records as he holds, and he gives a lot of credit for that, he played in an era where the Lakers, the Celtics, and his team was really the only good teams.
I mean, it throws me off when I'm a New York fan, and I watched Tim Duncan. I always wanted Tim Duncan to go to the New York Knicks, and I remember it was 2009 or 2008 when Tim Duncan became a free agent. There was a story coming out from New York that the Knicks were going to make a run for him, but Tim Duncan decided to stay over there with the Spurs. The closest thing that he had a chance to go to was the Dallas Mavericks, I heard. That was what I heard at the time. He decided to stay put. He decided to stay over there with the San Antonio Spurs and still won a title after that. So when you look at Tim Duncan, and again, it doesn't throw me off to say that Tim Duncan isn't one of the greatest big men in the NBA in NBA history. What throws me off of some of these fans that don't know anything about Tim Duncan is when you're telling me that you would take Kevin Durant over Tim Duncan, or you're going to, Kevin Durant, they're 2 different positions. Right. They are. I mean, but they're the same size. Kevin Durant is a 6'11", 6'10" player. So is Tim Duncan. Tim Duncan was a power forward center. Kevin Durant was a power forward 3. That's what he was. He also played the 2. They were two different players. But to me, I don't care how good Kevin Durant is on paper as a three-point shooter, as a shooter. His all-around game, he is not a winner. He was not born to be a winner. He had to go to teams to win. Tim Duncan never did that. Kevin Garnett did that. Go look at the greatest players in NBA history. And I'm not talking about the ones in the... Tim Duncan is one of very few people that really grew up in this day of age and never went to another team and tried to win with another team. He stayed with the same team.
Yeah, him and Kobe Bryant were really the last one of that group. And then, like we were talking about many times before, LeBron ruined it.
Kevin Garnett, he left to win championships. He left. He only won one. And then what really annoys me more than anything in the world is when people try to compare Kevin Garnett to Tim Duncan, when there is no comparison. I'm sorry, Kevin. I love you, Kevin. I think you're a great guy, funny guy, outstanding player, all world basketball player. You're a Hall of Famer. You are not Tim Duncan. Nope. You're not even close.
No, and I think as well, Tim Duncan also, because of his well-roundedness and his leadership, like I was saying, he knew what to do every time. And again, even if you're judging his skill set too, you're going to discredit his skill set and say, all right, he's not the most this, he's not the most that. If you're comparing Tim Duncan and Kevin Garnett, how many things does Garnett do definitively better? And the answer is none. And same thing with Durant. Outside of the shooting, what does he really do better?
And that's why I hate when people try to bring up Russell Westbrook to Steph Curry. And they try to compare and contrast both players because they're two separate players. They're two different players.
Ryan Snow.
It really annoys me because Russell Westbrook is really redefined the position at the point guard position. He really has. You could say whatever you want about Steph Curry and his three-point shot. Yes, he's redefined the three-point shot. He hasn't redefined the point guard position. That is Russell Westbrook. And I want to hear, well, he's a guy that runs up the points, the rebounds, and the assists. That's why he's an all-world triple-double phenomenon.
Everybody does that.
Let me tell you something. It is not easy in a season to have 35 or more triple-double games in a regular season. I don't care how good the team is or how good you are as a player. It's not easy.
Right.
And Oscar Robertson was the last person to do it.
Right. It's not like it's a guy either that's a 6'9", 6'10" freak of nature athlete like LeBron is or Durant is that can just do all that. Right. You're doing it as a point guard, where Westbrook, I think, is 6'5". I mean, he's pretty big for a point guard, but he's 6'5". You're not supposed to pull down 10 rebounds in a game. Nevertheless, a season averaging 82 games.
He's an athletic beast, and why I see people sit back and give Steph Curry the edge and say that Steph Curry is one of the top 5 point guards in NBA history. It's a joke. It is an absolute joke. When anybody puts Steph Curry in the same value of Jason Kidd or an Isaiah Thomas or a Magic Johnson. Any one of those players. Steph Curry is not one of those players. Not one.
Mm-hmm. Greatest shooter, you could argue. Not that, though. You're right. I wouldn't
even say greatest shooter because he plays in a time the game is completely different.
That's fair. No,
Reggie Miller, if Reggie Miller played in the game and the way the game is played now, Reggie Miller would probably be one of the best three-point shooters, if not the best three-point shooter in the NBA.
Right. I'm not even saying he is, but I'm saying regardless of the perspective, that would be the one thing to argue for him for. The all-around point guard game when judging defense, when judging ball handling, stuff like that, that is not going to be Steph Curry in terms of all-time top 10 point guards.
But again, that's not even what I'm talking about. The problem is that people are blinded to see the game of basketball and the players that you talk about, and you try to compare and contrast the player from those days to these days. You can't compare Jason Kidd to Steph Curry. You know why? Because in those days, you had to play defense. In these days, they don't. That's the difference. You talk about Jason Kidd. Is Jason Kidd one of the best three-point shooters at his position of all time? No, he's not. He's one of the worst. He's one of the worst. But what Jason Kidd did at the point guard position was redefine the game, especially in the late 90s, early 2000s. He redefined the point guard position. He made the point guard position a value position moving forward. And he was one of the guys that transitioned the game from a big man game to a small man game.
Right.
Jason Kidd.
And again, it led to a whole ripple effect of top point guards, guys like Derrick Rose when he entered the league in 07, 08. And then, like we were just mentioning, Russell Westbrook, John Wall, guys like that. These are attacking point guards like he was, but also had great passing ability.
And that's why when you sit back and you listen to some of these NBA fans, and there's a lot of Golden State fans, and I understand. Listen, you like Steph Curry, you like Klay Thompson, you like Draymond Green, even you like Kevin Durant. And Kevin Durant right now, you can say what you want. Kevin Durant is not coming back this year for the Nets. He's decided that he's going to sit out for the rest of the season. He'll be back next year. Here's the problem. when you look at Kevin Durant and you try to mix him up, and when Kevin Durant's career is over, and it will be over eventually, and you try to compare Kevin Durant to Tim Duncan or Kevin Durant to a Wilt Chamberlain or a Bill Russell, you're not going to be able to compare him to that era because the game was completely different. And as much as I love Kevin Durant's game as an offensive player, Kevin Durant's offensive game would not have fit in the 90s.